The distant thunder of hooves was the first warning that Josephine Walters received as she peered anxiously through the cracked window of her covered wagon. The vast expanse of the Texas Panhandle stretched before her, golden red in the dying light of a June sunset in 1875. She had known traveling alone was dangerous, but after her father's death in Wichita, she'd had no choice but to continue their journey to Amarillo alone, where her only living relative, an aunt she barely remembered, awaited. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for her father's old Colt revolver. Her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded, though she doubted her ability to hit anything if it came down to it. 22 years of proper Boston upbringing hadn't prepared her for the harsh realities of the frontier. 4 riders appeared on the horizon, silhouettes dark against the fiery sky, advancing at a deliberate pace that sent ice through her veins. Not travelers, not soldiers. Their postures alone told her everything she needed to know: outlaws. Josephine slipped from the wagon seat and scrambled to unhitch the exhausted horses, hoping against hope that she could mount one and flee, but it was too late. The riders had spotted her and were closing in fast. Her fingers fumbled with the leather harnesses as panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Well now, what do we have here?" The tallest of the 4 men grinned as they formed a loose circle around her wagon. His face was weathered and scarred, eyes cold beneath the brim of a dusty hat. "A little lady all alone on the prairie. Mighty dangerous, wouldn't you say, boys?" The others laughed, a sound that chilled Josephine to her core. She gripped the revolver behind her skirts, knowing she was outmatched but unwilling to surrender without a fight. "I have nothing of value," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Just some personal belongings and supplies. You're welcome to what food I can spare, but then I must ask you to move on." The leader dismounted, spurs jingling against the hard-packed earth. "Oh, I reckon we'll be the ones deciding when to move on, miss." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "And I see plenty of value right here." The other men dismounted as well, spreading out as they approached. One began rifling through her wagon while another moved toward the horses. The 4th man, a wiry figure with a pockmarked face, stepped uncomfortably close to Josephine. "Pretty little thing," he said, reaching for a strand of her auburn hair that had escaped her bonnet. Josephine raised the revolver then, pointing it squarely at his chest. "Don't touch me." The men froze for a heartbeat before erupting in laughter. "She's got fire, this one," the leader exclaimed, seemingly delighted by her defiance. "I like that. Makes it more interesting when they fight a little." Josephine's finger tensed on the trigger. She might only get one shot before they overwhelmed her, but she was determined to make it count. Just then, another sound cut through the tension: hoofbeats, fast and purposeful, approaching from the east. The outlaws turned, hands instinctively moving to their weapons. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. He rode a powerful black stallion that seemed to devour the ground beneath its hooves. As he drew closer, Josephine could make out his features: tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark hat pulled low over his eyes and a Winchester rifle held confidently across his saddle. The stranger slowed his mount to a walk as he approached the tense gathering, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. The outlaws shifted uneasily, clearly reassessing their odds. "Evening," the newcomer said, his voice deep and calm as he surveyed the scene. His eyes lingered on Josephine and the gun in her hand before returning to the 4 men. "Seems like the lady's having some trouble." The outlaw leader squared his shoulders. "Nothing that concerns you, mister, just helping a stranded traveler." "Is that so?" The stranger's mouth quirked slightly at one corner. In one fluid motion, he swung down from his saddle, rifle still in hand. Strange way of helping. 4 men surrounding a lone woman at gunpoint. You'd best move along, the leader warned, his hand hovering near his holster. This ain't your business. The stranger took a step forward, and something in his posture made even the hardened outlaws tense. Actually, it is. She's under my watch now. His voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable threat. So you boys have a choice to make, and I suggest you make it wisely. For a long moment, no one moved. Josephine held her breath, finger still on the trigger of her father's revolver, eyes darting between the stranger and the outlaws. The leader assessed the newcomer, clearly calculating his chances. The stranger stood relaxed but alert, his rifle held casually but ready. There was something in his bearing that spoke of experience and danger. 4 against 1, the leader finally said. Those ain't good odds for you, friend. Never cared much for odds, the stranger replied. Just for outcomes. His eyes, now visible to Josephine as the last rays of sunlight caught them, were a startling blue, clear and cold as winter ice. And I can promise you, the outcome won't be pleasant if you stay. One of the outlaws, younger than the others, shifted nervously. Micah, I think that's Nash Irwin. The name seemed to have an immediate effect. The leader Micah stiffened, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time. The bounty hunter, he asked, voice suddenly wary. The stranger Nash didn't confirm or deny, just continued to watch them with that same steady gaze. Micah glanced at his companions, then back at Nash. A tense silence stretched between them before he finally nodded sharply. We were just leaving anyway. Not worth the trouble for what little she's got. Nash didn't move as the outlaws mounted their horses, his rifle still held ready. Josephine remained frozen in place, the revolver trembling slightly in her grasp. This ain't over, Irwin, Micah called as they prepared to ride away. Our paths'll cross again. Looking forward to it, Nash replied evenly. The outlaws spurred their horses, dust rising in their wake as they galloped away into the gathering darkness. Only when they were distant specks on the horizon did Nash lower his rifle and turn to Josephine. You can put that down now, madam, he said, nodding toward her revolver. Though I'm impressed you were ready to use it. Josephine lowered the weapon slowly, her heart still racing. Thank you, she managed, her voice shakier than she would have liked. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Nash Irwin studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Nothing good, he said finally. You shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe. I had little choice, Josephine replied, straightening her shoulders. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt a flicker of indignation at his tone. My father died in Wichita. We were traveling to Amarillo together. Something in Nash's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, madam. Miss Josephine Walters, she offered, extending her hand formally despite the absurdity of proper introductions in their current situation. He looked at her hand for a moment before taking it briefly in his much larger one. Nash Irwin. Are you really a bounty hunter, Mr. Irwin? She asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Among other things, Nash glanced at the darkening sky and then back to her wagon. It'll be full dark soon. We should make camp. Those men won't likely return tonight, but there are other dangers on the trail. Josephine hesitated. She had been raised to be wary of strangers, especially men, and despite his timely rescue, she knew nothing about Nash Irwin beyond his name and apparent reputation. As if reading her thoughts, he added, I'll help you set up camp and keep watch, but I'll sleep under the stars, well away from your wagon. You have my word as a gentleman. There was something in his steady gaze that made Josephine believe him. Besides, she had little choice. Night was falling rapidly, and she was in no position to refuse protection. Very well, Mr. Irwin. I accept your help gratefully. Nash nodded once, then set about making efficient preparations for the night. He found a suitable spot near a small creek, helped unhitch her horses and secure them, and gathered firewood while Josephine prepared a simple meal from her dwindling supplies. As they sat by the campfire later, the vast Texas sky ablaze with stars overhead, Josephine studied her unexpected protector. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly, a man perhaps in his early 30s, with features that might have been handsome if not for the weathered hardness that spoke of a difficult life. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the shadow of several days' worth of stubble. "How far is it to Amarillo from here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "About 2 days' ride if the weather holds," Nash replied, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "Your aunt expecting you?" "Yes, though she doesn't know I'm traveling alone now." Josephine wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the night chill. "My father wrote to her from Wichita before he fell ill. Typhoid fever." She swallowed hard. "It took him quickly." Nash nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry. It's a hard country." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Josephine admitted, staring into the flames. "Father had dreams of starting a new life in Amarillo. He was going to open a general store. After Mother died last year, there was nothing left for us in Boston. And now I don't know. My Aunt Clara is my only family. I've never met her. She and my father had a falling out years ago, but she's all I have left." Nash added another log to the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night. "Your aunt's full name?" "Clara Thornton." "My father said she married a cattle rancher some years back." Nash's expression changed subtly. "The Thornton spread is one of the largest around Amarillo. Your aunt married well. You know of them. Everyone in these parts knows the Thorntons." Nash's tone was neutral, but something in his eyes made Josephine wonder if there was more to the story. "If you're Clara Thornton's niece, you won't want for anything." "I'm not interested in their money," Josephine said quickly. "I just need somewhere to belong again." Nash studied her for a long moment before speaking. "This country has a way of testing people, Miss Walters. It strips away pretenses, leaves only what's real. Some folks can't handle that kind of truth." "And you think I can't?" she challenged, lifting her chin. The ghost of a smile touched his lips again. "I saw you ready to face down 4 outlaws with nothing but your father's revolver. I think you've got more steel in you than you realize." Josephine felt a flush of unexpected pride at his words. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin." "Nash," he corrected. "Out here, formality doesn't mean much." "Then you must call me Josephine." He nodded, then rose to his feet. "You should get some rest. I'll take first watch." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "Those men might think better of their decision, especially if they've been drinking. And there are wolves and other predators about." "Then I'll take second watch," she insisted. "You can't stay awake all night." Nash looked like he might argue, then seemed to reconsider. "I'll wake you in a few hours, then." True to his word, Nash settled himself at a respectful distance from her wagon after ensuring she was safely inside. Josephine lay on her narrow bedroll, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the crackling fire, the occasional nickering of the horses, the distant howl of coyotes. She thought she would lie awake, mind racing with the day's events, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. When Nash gently called her name hours later, she started awake, momentarily disoriented. "Your watch," he said quietly as she emerged from the wagon. "Though all's quiet so far." Josephine nodded, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "What should I do if I see or hear something?" "Wake me immediately. Don't try to handle anything yourself." Nash handed her the Winchester rifle. Know how to use this. My father taught me the basics, she admitted. Though I'm not a very good shot, point and pull if you have to. Nash demonstrated how to hold it properly. But again, wake me first. As he settled down near the fire, Josephine took up her position, rifle across her lap. The responsibility of keeping watch made her intensely aware of every sound in the darkness. The minutes crawled by as she strained her eyes against the night. "May I ask you something?" she said softly, unsure if Nash was still awake. "Go ahead," came his reply, surprising her. "What made you intervene today? You could have ridden past." There was a long pause before he answered. "Some things a man can't ride past and still call himself a man." "Is that why you became a bounty hunter? To help people?" Another pause. "No, that came from a different place." Something in his tone discouraged further questions, and Josephine let the conversation lapse into silence. She continued her vigilant watch until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. As they broke camp the next morning, Josephine noticed Nash's gaze frequently scanning the horizon. His manner was alert, almost tense, despite his outward calm. "You think they'll come back?" she asked as they hitched the horses to her wagon. "Hard to say," Nash replied. "Depends how desperate they are and whether they've recognized me for certain." He finished securing the harness before adding, "I'll ride with you to Amarillo. It's on my way." Relief flooded through Josephine, though she tried not to show it too plainly. "I wouldn't want to inconvenience you." "No inconvenience," he said simply. As they set out, the sun climbing higher in a cloudless blue sky, Josephine found herself stealing glances at her taciturn companion. Nash rode alongside her wagon, sometimes moving ahead to scout the trail, always returning with the same watchful vigilance. He spoke little, answering her occasional questions with brief responses, but offering little of himself voluntarily. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. They stopped in the shade of a small copse of cottonwoods beside a nearly dry creek bed to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Nash's provisions. "May I ask what takes you to Amarillo?" Josephine ventured as they sat in the meager shade. Nash took a long drink from his canteen before answering. "Business. The bounty hunting kind." A flicker of amusement crossed his features. "You ask a lot of questions." "My father always said curiosity was my besetting sin." Josephine smiled slightly. "He claimed it would be the death of me someday. In this country, he might be right." Nash's expression grew serious again. "Some things are better not known, Josephine." "Is that what happened to you?" she asked boldly. "Something better not known." Nash's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something behind his guarded expression, a flash of old pain, quickly suppressed. "We should get moving," he said, rising to his feet. "Still a long way to go before nightfall." Josephine didn't press further, sensing she had touched on something he wasn't willing to share. As they continued their journey across the vast, empty landscape, she found herself increasingly curious about the enigmatic man who had appointed himself her protector. The afternoon brought clouds building on the western horizon, towering thunderheads that promised a storm by evening. Nash watched them with concern as they traveled. "We need to find better shelter than your wagon before that hits," he said, nodding toward the approaching weather. "Plain storms can turn deadly quick." "Is there somewhere we can take cover?" Josephine asked, eyeing the threatening sky. Nash pointed to a distant line of trees that marked what appeared to be a more substantial watercourse. "Might find something along that creek. Let's push the pace." They urged the horses to a faster trot, the wagon jolting uncomfortably over the uneven ground. The wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. As they approached the tree line, Nash suddenly raised a hand, signaling Josephine to stop. He dismounted in one fluid motion, rifle in hand, and moved forward cautiously. "What is it?" she whispered. "Smoke," he replied tersely. "Someone's camped ahead." Josephine's heart quickened, immediately thinking of the outlaws from the previous day. "Should we find another place?" Nash scanned the horizon, assessing their options as the storm clouds rolled ever closer. "No time. Stay here while I check it out." Before she could protest, he had vanished into the trees, moving with the silent efficiency of a predator. Josephine waited anxiously, the wind whipping at her skirts and the horses growing increasingly restless as thunder boomed closer. When Nash reappeared several minutes later, his expression was grim but determined. "It's a way station. Small place, little more than a trading post." "Looks legitimate enough." "But," Josephine prompted, sensing his reservation, "but I don't like the look of some of the men inside. Could be trouble, could be nothing." Nash glanced at the darkening sky. "We don't have much choice, though. That storm's going to break any minute." As if to emphasize his point, fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against the wagon canvas. "Stay close to me," Nash instructed as they approached the small collection of rough-hewn buildings nestled among the trees. "Let me do the talking. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately, storm or no storm." The way station consisted of a main building that appeared to serve as a combination of store, saloon, and hostelry, a small stable, and what looked like a storage shed. Several horses were hitched outside, and light glowed from the windows despite the early hour, a beacon against the rapidly darkening sky. As they drew nearer, the door of the main building swung open, and a burly man with a thick beard stepped out onto the porch, shotgun held casually in his hands. "Afternoon," he called over the rising wind. "You folks looking for shelter from the blow?" Nash positioned himself between the man and Josephine. "That's right. Got a place where the lady can stay dry and a spot for our horses." The bearded man looked them over assessingly before nodding. "2 bits for the both of you, includes stable space. $1 extra if you want hot food." "Fair enough," Nash said, though his posture remained alert. "Any other travelers passing through today?" The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Few folks come and go. Why'd you ask?" "Just curious about road conditions ahead," Nash replied smoothly. The man seemed to accept this explanation. "Storm's been brewing all day. You got lucky finding us when you did." He gestured toward the stable. "Get your animals settled, then come on in. Name's Harlan, by the way. Harlan Moore." "This here's Moore's Rest." Nash nodded acknowledgement but didn't offer their names in return. As Harlan went back inside, Nash turned to Josephine. "Remember what I said. First sign of trouble, we're gone." "What kind of trouble are you expecting?" she asked quietly as they led the wagon toward the stable. "The kind that follows a man like me," Nash replied grimly. "And the kind that might be looking for a woman traveling alone. Keep that revolver of yours close." The stable boy who helped them with the horses was young and talkative, eagerly sharing that the storm was predicted to be a bad one, likely to last through the night. He also mentioned that there were currently 6 other guests at Moore's Rest, 4 men traveling together and 2 lone travelers. Josephine felt Nash tense at this information, though he gave no outward sign of concern. After ensuring their horses were properly cared for and paying the stable boy, they made their way to the main building just as the rain began to fall in earnest. The interior of Moore's Rest was dimly lit and smoky, with a long bar along one wall, several tables scattered throughout, and a staircase leading to what Josephine presumed were rooms for the night. 5 men sat at a table in the corner, playing cards, while another sat alone at the bar. A woman moved between tables, serving drinks. All conversation ceased momentarily as they entered, every eye turning to assess the newcomers. Josephine felt acutely conscious of being the only female guest, and she instinctively moved closer to Nash. Harlan Moore emerged from a back room, nodding in greeting. "Storm's hit proper now. You made it just in time." He gestured to the woman serving drinks. "Lydia there can show the lady to a room if she wants to freshen up." Nash's hand moved subtly to rest near his holstered revolver. "We'll take one room. For propriety's sake, my sister will have the bed and I'll take the floor." Josephine shot him a surprised glance at the lie but quickly composed her features. Harlan raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on their supposed relationship. "Suit yourself. Lydia, show them to room 3. The woman Lydia was perhaps in her 40s, with tired eyes and a face that had once been pretty. She led them up the narrow staircase to a small, sparse room containing a single bed, a washstand, and a straight-backed chair. "Supper's in an hour," she informed them, her voice carrying a hint of a southern accent. "It's stew tonight. Not bad if you're hungry." "Thank you," Josephine said, trying to smile despite her unease. When Lydia had gone, closing the door behind her, Josephine turned to Nash. "Sister." "Better than the alternatives they might have assumed," he replied, moving to the window to survey the storm outside. "Besides, it gives me reason to stay close without raising eyebrows." "You truly believe we're in danger here?" Josephine asked, setting her small traveling bag on the bed. Nash's expression was grave as he turned back to face her. "One of the men at that card table downstairs is Billy Rakes. He rides with a gang out of the Oklahoma Territory, thieves, cattle rustlers, worse. I brought in his brother 6 months ago. He swung at Fort Smith." Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothing. "Did he recognize you?" "Hard to say. He looked my way longer than the others, but he didn't react." Nash checked his revolver discreetly. "Could be coincidence he's here, but I don't much believe in coincidences." "What do? We eat, we rest, we wait out the storm. We leave at first light or sooner if the weather breaks." Nash's voice was calm, matter of fact. "And we stay alert. If Rakes is here on legitimate business, we've nothing to worry about." "And if he's not?" Nash's eyes met hers steadily. "Then we deal with it." The simplicity of his answer was somehow more frightening than a detailed explanation might have been. Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how far she was from the safe, orderly world she had known in Boston. In just over a week, she had lost her father, traveled hundreds of miles alone, been threatened by outlaws, and now found herself sharing a room with a bounty hunter while potential enemies lurked below. "I never imagined life out here would be like this," she admitted softly. Nash's expression softened slightly. "Most days it isn't. You've had more than your share of trouble." "Have I?" Josephine looked up at him. "Or is this simply what life is like in this hard country of yours?" "It's not my country," Nash replied, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. "Just where I happen to be." Before Josephine could question him further, a crack of thunder shook the building, so loud and close that she started in alarm. Rain lashed against the window as the storm intensified. "We won't be going anywhere tonight," Nash observed, moving away from the window. "You should rest while you can. I'll go down and get a sense of our fellow guests." "I'll come with you," Josephine decided, standing. "I'm famished, and besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Nash looked like he might argue but then nodded. "Stay close to me. And remember, we're siblings traveling to Amarillo to visit family." "I'm quite capable of maintaining a pretense, Mr. Irwin," Josephine replied with a touch of asperity. "I did attend finishing school after all." A ghost of a smile touched Nash's lips. "I'm sure your finishing school covered many useful topics, Miss Walters, though I doubt how to avoid outlaws was among them." "No," she conceded, finding herself returning his almost smile. That particular lesson seems to be part of my continuing education. The common room downstairs had grown more crowded as travelers sought shelter from the intensifying storm. Nash guided Josephine to a small table in the corner, positioning himself so that he could observe the entire room while keeping his back to the wall. Lydia brought them bowls of stew and corn bread, along with mugs of coffee. The food was simple but filling, and Josephine realized how hungry she had been. As they ate, she followed Nash's example, casually observing the other patrons while appearing focused on her meal. The card game in the opposite corner had grown louder, with occasional bursts of laughter or groans as fortunes changed hands. The man Nash had identified as Billy Rakes was winning, judging by the pile of coins before him. He was younger than Josephine had expected, perhaps not yet 30, with sharp features and restless eyes that frequently scanned the room. At a nearby table, two men engaged in quiet conversation, occasionally glancing toward the bar where Harlan was serving drinks. They wore the dust-covered clothing of cattlemen, but something about their manner struck Josephine as odd, though she couldn't quite place why. "The two men by the window," she murmured to Nash. "Something seems off about them." Nash didn't turn to look directly but nodded slightly. "Good eye. They're too clean under that trail dust, and the one on the left has city boots, not working boots. Who do you think they are? Could be anything from land speculators to con men." Nash took a sip of his coffee. Just another reason to be gone as soon as possible. The evening wore on, with the storm showing no signs of abating. The crash of thunder and howl of wind provided a dramatic backdrop to the increasingly rowdy atmosphere inside. More whiskey was consumed, voices grew louder, and the card game became more heated. Josephine was acutely aware of being one of only two women in the room, the other being Lydia, who moved efficiently between tables, seemingly impervious to the occasional lewd comment or wandering hand. When one of the card players made a particularly crude remark as she passed, Josephine felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and indignation. Nash noticed her discomfort. "Perhaps you should retire upstairs," he suggested quietly. "And leave you alone to watch them all," she countered. "I think not. Besides, I doubt I could sleep with this racket." As if to punctuate her statement, a roar of anger erupted from the card table. One of the players had stood, accusing another of cheating. Billy Rakes remained seated, watching the confrontation with cold amusement. Harlan Moore emerged from behind the bar, shotgun in hand. "Take it outside or settle it peacefully," he warned. "I don't allow fighting in my establishment." The angry player, a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache, hesitated at the sight of the shotgun before grudgingly returning to his seat. "I've got my eye on you," he muttered to his alleged cheater. As the tension slowly dissipated, Josephine became aware of eyes on her. Billy Rakes was staring in their direction, his expression calculating. When he caught her gaze, he smiled, a slow, predatory curl of his lips that made her skin crawl. Nash had noticed too. Without looking at Rakes, he said quietly, "Time for us to go upstairs. Don't look at him again." They rose casually, Nash leaving coins on the table for their meal. As they crossed toward the staircase, Josephine could feel Rakes watching them. Just as they reached the stairs, his voice called out, "Hold up there, friend." Nash paused, turning slowly. His posture was relaxed, but Josephine could sense the coiled tension beneath his calm exterior. "Something I can help you with." Rakes pushed back from the card table and stood. The other players watched with interest, sensing potential entertainment. "You look mighty familiar. Have we crossed paths before?" "Don't believe so," Nash replied evenly. "Just passing through with my sister here." Rakes took a few steps closer, studying Nash's face. "No, I'm certain we've met. I never forget a face." His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver, especially one that caused my family grief. A hush fell over the room. Even the storm seemed to quiet momentarily, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Your sister, you say?" Rakes's gaze shifted to Josephine, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her want to shrink back. "Don't see much family resemblance." "Different mothers," Nash said, his voice still calm despite the palpable tension. "Now, if you'll excuse us, it's been a long day of travel." "I don't think I will excuse you," Rakes said, his pretense of cordiality dropping away. "Not until we settle our business, Nash Irwin." The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Several patrons shifted uneasily, moving away from what was clearly building toward a confrontation. Nash positioned himself slightly in front of Josephine, though his stance remained casual. "There's no business between us, Rakes. Your brother made his choices. I just did my job." "My brother wasn't no killer," Rakes spat. "He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You hung an innocent man." "The judge hung a guilty man," Nash corrected. "After a fair trial with 12 witnesses testifying they saw him shoot that storekeeper in cold blood." Rakes's face darkened with fury. "You're a dead man walking, Irwin. Been tracking you for months." "And yet here I am," Nash replied. "Seems you're not very good at tracking." The taunt had its intended effect. Rakes's control slipped, his hand moving toward his gun. "I'm going to enjoy watching you die slow." Before he could draw, Harlan Moore stepped forward, shotgun raised. "Not in my place, you ain't. Take it outside or not at all." Rakes hesitated, eyes darting between Nash and the shotgun. After a tense moment, he lowered his hand slightly. "Another time, then, Irwin, when you don't have a woman and a shotgun to hide behind." Nash's expression remained impassive. "I'll be moving on tomorrow." "You're welcome to try your luck on the open road." "Oh, I will," Rakes promised, a cold smile spreading across his face. "And I won't be alone." With that ominous statement hanging in the air, he returned to the card table, though his eyes never left Nash. The room gradually returned to its previous level of noise, though the atmosphere remained charged with tension. Nash placed a gentle hand on Josephine's elbow, guiding her up the stairs. Only when they were safely inside their room with the door locked behind them did he let out a long, controlled breath. "You need to leave at first light," he said, his voice hard with determination. "Without me." "What?" Josephine stared at him in disbelief. "That's absurd." "You saw how that man looked at me. I'd be in more danger alone." "You'd be in more danger with me," Nash countered. "Rakes wants revenge, and he won't care who gets hurt in the process. I won't put you at risk because of my past." "And what about the 4 outlaws who were ready to do God knows what to me before you intervened?" Josephine challenged. "Have you forgotten them so quickly?" "That's different, is it?" She stepped closer to him, anger flaring. "You said yourself this country tests people." "Well, I'm being tested, and I refuse to fail by abandoning someone who has helped me, simply because it might be dangerous." Nash's expression was a mixture of frustration and something else, perhaps surprise at her vehemence. "This isn't your fight, Josephine." "It became my fight the moment you stood between me and those outlaws," she insisted. "And it remains my fight until we reach Amarillo safely together." They stood facing each other in the small room, the storm raging outside matching the intensity of their standoff. Finally, Nash shook his head, a reluctant smile touching his lips. "You are possibly the most stubborn woman I've ever encountered." "So I've been told," Josephine replied, not backing down. "Now, what's our plan?" Nash's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "We leave before dawn while they're still sleeping off the whiskey. The storm should pass by then." He moved to the window, peering through a gap in the worn curtains. Rakes won't be alone. He's likely got men watching the stable. Then how will we get to our horses? We create a distraction. Nash turned back to her. Get some rest. I'll keep watch tonight. Wake me for my turn, Josephine insisted. Remembering their arrangement from the previous night, Nash looked like he might argue, then nodded. 4 hours, then I'll wake you. Josephine settled on the narrow bed, still fully clothed except for her boots. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for some time. Her mind raced with the events of the day, with the threat that awaited them, and with growing questions about the man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. When Nash gently shook her awake, it felt as though she had only just closed her eyes. The room was dark except for a sliver of moonlight peeking through the curtains. Has the storm passed? She asked, sitting up groggily. Mostly, Nash replied. Just some light rain now. He handed her a cup of water. 2 hours until we move. Rest while you can. Josephine took the cup gratefully. Did you sleep at all? Enough. His tone suggested otherwise, but Josephine didn't press the issue. As she took her position by the window to keep watch, Nash stretched out on the floor, using his saddle bags as a pillow. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened and evened out the sleep of a man accustomed to snatching rest whenever possible. The night passed quietly. From her vantage point, Josephine could see the stables and the main yard of the way station, dimly lit by a lantern hanging from the porch. As Nash had predicted, a man stood smoking in the shadows near the stable door, a sentry ensuring they couldn't leave unnoticed. When the eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly, Nash woke without prompting, as if his body was attuned to some internal clock. He joined Josephine at the window, following her gaze to the man guarding the stable. Just as I thought, he murmured. Time to create our distraction. Nash explained his plan, quickly simple but potentially effective. While he caused a commotion at the far end of the building, Josephine would make her way to the stable. Once inside, she would ready their horses while Nash dealt with any opposition. Are you certain this will work? Josephine asked, concerned by the risks involved. No, Nash admitted frankly. But it's better than waiting for Rakes to gather his full strength. The longer we delay, the more men he can call in. They gathered their few belongings quickly and silently. Before they left the room, Nash handed Josephine her father's revolver. Remember how to use this, she nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Point and pull. Aim for the center of the body, not the head. Bigger target. Nash's eyes met hers. And Josephine, don't hesitate. If someone threatens you, shoot them. The stark instruction sent a chill through her, but she nodded again. This was the reality of the world she now inhabited, a place where hesitation could mean death. They crept down the stairs, the pre-dawn hour ensuring the common room was deserted, except for a few men sleeping off their drink at the tables. Moving silently past them, they slipped out a side door into the damp, cool morning air. Nash pointed to a narrow path leading toward the back of the stable. Count to 50 after I leave, then go. If anything happens to me, get on your horse and ride hard for Amarillo. Don't stop for anything. Before she could respond, he squeezed her hand briefly and melted into the shadows, moving toward the far end of the property. Josephine counted slowly, heart pounding in her chest, the revolver heavy in her hand. At 50, she took a deep breath and moved along the path he had indicated, staying in the shadows as much as possible. She had almost reached the stable when a crash and shout erupted from the direction Nash had gone. Moments later, the guard by the stable door cursed and hurried toward the commotion. Seizing her opportunity, Josephine slipped inside the stable. The horses nickered softly as she entered, and she moved quickly to locate theirs. The stable boy was nowhere to be seen, likely still asleep in the small room at the back. Working as quickly as her shaking hands would allow, Josephine began saddling their horses. She had just finished with her own mount and was starting on Nash's stallion when she heard the stable door creak open behind her. "Well now, look what we have here." The voice sent ice through her veins. Turning slowly, Josephine found herself facing Billy Rakes, his revolver aimed squarely at her chest. "Where's your guardian angel, miss?" Rakes asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Creating a diversion, is he? Not very original. Josephine's own revolver was tucked into her skirt pocket, momentarily out of reach. She kept her voice steady with effort. "Mr. Irwin will be here any moment." "I'm counting on it," Rakes replied. "My men are waiting for him, but I thought I'd come see about you myself." He took a step closer. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be mixed up with a man like Nash Irwin. He's got a lot of enemies. And apparently not very intelligent ones," Josephine retorted, anger overcoming her fear. "If you had any sense, you'd leave now." Rakes laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "Got spirit, I see. Your brother trained you well." The way he emphasized the word made it clear he didn't believe their pretense. "But he's not here to protect you now." He moved closer still, close enough that Josephine could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Maybe I'll take you with me when I leave. After Irwin's dead, of course. Might be fun having company on the trail." Josephine's hand inched toward her pocket, her fingers closing around the grip of her father's revolver. Rakes was so focused on intimidating her that he failed to notice the movement. "I'd rather die," she said clearly, drawing strength from her own defiance. "That can be arranged too," Rakes replied, his smile turning ugly. "After I've had my fun." In one fluid motion, Josephine drew the revolver and fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the stable, the horses whinnying and stamping in alarm. Rakes staggered backward, a look of shock on his face as he clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me," he exclaimed, as if unable to believe a woman would dare such a thing. "And I'll shoot you again if you come any closer," Josephine warned, keeping the gun trained on him despite her trembling hands. Rakes's shock gave way to fury. He raised his own weapon, his face contorted with rage. "You're dead," you little before he could finish. The stable door burst open and Nash appeared, his own gun already drawn. Without hesitation, he fired twice. Rakes crumpled to the ground, his unfired revolver clattering across the wooden floor. For a moment, neither of them moved. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the familiar scents of hay and horses. "Are you hurt?" Nash asked urgently, moving to Josephine's side. She shook her head mutely, unable to tear her eyes away from Rakes's motionless form. She had shot a man. He would have killed her or worse, but still, the reality of what she had done struck her with physical force. Nash gently took the revolver from her rigid grip. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. "He would have shown you no mercy." "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "Yes." Nash's voice was grim as he quickly checked Rakes for any signs of life. "We need to go. His men will have heard the shots." The urgency in his tone snapped Josephine out of her shock. Moving on instinct now, she helped Nash finish preparing the horses. Within minutes, they were mounted and leading the animals toward the stable door. Nash paused before exiting, scanning the yard. "2 men down by the main building. The rest must be searching for me on the other side. We'll make for the trees and then cut north toward Amarillo." They rode out into the gray dawn, spurring their horses to a gallop as soon as they cleared the yard. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by the crack of gunfire, but they were already racing for the cover of the trees. The rain had stopped, but the ground was muddy and treacherous. Josephine clung to her horse's mane, focusing only on keeping pace with Nash as they thundered across the open space, and into the relative safety of the wooded creek bed. Once among the trees, Nash led them on a winding path that utilized the natural cover while maintaining their general direction. They rode hard for nearly an hour before he finally signaled for them to slow their pace. "Need to rest the horses," he explained, drawing his mount alongside hers. "And make sure we're not being followed." Josephine nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through their escape was ebbing, leaving her shaky and drained. The events of the morning, of shooting a man, of watching Nash kill to protect her, seemed almost dreamlike in their horror. They stopped in a small clearing beside the creek, which was running higher than the day before due to the night's rainfall. While Nash tended to the horses, Josephine sank onto a fallen log, her legs too weak to support her any longer. "Here," Nash said, returning to offer her his canteen. "Drink some water, it'll help." She accepted it gratefully, taking several long swallows before handing it back. "How far to Amarillo now? If we keep a steady pace, we should reach it by nightfall." Nash studied her pale face with concern. "Are you going to be all right to ride that far?" Josephine straightened her shoulders with effort. "I'll manage. I've come this far, haven't I?" A hint of admiration flickered in Nash's eyes. "Yes, you have. Most women I know would have collapsed in hysterics after what you've been through." "Perhaps you don't know many women," Josephine replied with a ghost of a smile. "Fair point," Nash conceded, the faintest answering smile touching his lips before his expression grew serious again. "What happened back there? Taking a life. It stays with you." "There's no shame in being affected by it." Josephine looked down at her hands, surprised to find them relatively steady now. "I keep thinking I should feel more. Horror, I suppose, but all I feel is relief that we survived." She met his gaze. "Does that make me a terrible person?" "No," Nash said firmly. "It makes you a survivor. The world isn't divided into good people and bad people, Josephine. Just people trying to live by their own lights." He paused. "Rakes would have killed you without a second thought. You defended yourself. That's all there is to it." His words provided more comfort than she would have expected. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, listening to the burbling of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. "We should move on," Nash said eventually, rising to his feet. "Rakes's men could still be tracking us." They mounted up and continued their journey, keeping to the creek bed where possible to mask their trail. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the land began to change subtly, the terrain becoming slightly less flat, with more frequent stands of trees breaking up the open prairie. Around midday, they paused again to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions Nash had thought to grab before they fled. The simple meal of jerky and dried fruit was consumed in comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. "May I ask you something?" Josephine said finally, breaking the quiet. Nash nodded, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "Why did you become a bounty hunter?" She had asked before, but this time she sensed he might actually answer. Nash was silent for so long that Josephine thought he might ignore the question again. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I was a Texas Ranger once. 8 years ago. Had a wife, a small ranch outside of Dallas." His eyes focused on something distant, seeing not the creek before them but memories of another time. "Sarah was her name. We'd been married 3 years when a gang hit our place while I was away on patrol." Josephine's heart constricted at the pain evident in his voice. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Nash continued as if he hadn't heard her. "They took everything of value, burned what they couldn't carry, and they killed Sarah." His voice remained even, but his knuckles whitened as his hands clenched. "I tracked them for months, found them one by one. Brought them in alive because that's what the law demanded. And then, And then the last two escaped before trial, bribed a guard and vanished. A muscle ticked in Nash's jaw. I resigned my commission and went after them. Been hunting bounties ever since. Figured if I couldn't find justice for Sarah, I could at least make sure other killers didn't walk free. The weight of his story hung between them. Josephine understood now the shadows she had glimpsed behind his controlled exterior, the source of the hardness in his eyes. Did you ever find them? The last two, she asked, one of them. Nash's voice was flat. The other is still out there somewhere. That's why you keep moving, Josephine realized. You're still looking for him. Nash nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. His name is Frank Blackwood. Last I heard, he was running with a gang near the New Mexico border. Something in his tone made Josephine ask, "What will you do when you find him?" Nash's eyes met hers, cold and determined. "Bring him in, dead or alive." The matter-of-fact statement should have frightened her, but Josephine found she understood his need for closure, for justice. She had experienced only a fraction of the violence and loss that had shaped Nash Irwin, yet already she felt changed by it, hardened in ways she couldn't have imagined a week ago. "I hope you find him," she said simply. "And I hope it brings you peace when you do." Nash studied her face, seeming to search for judgment or condemnation and finding none. Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle she might have imagined it. "We should keep moving," he said, rising to his feet. But as he helped her mount her horse, his touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Josephine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the midday sun. They rode through the afternoon, the miles passing in a rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional exchange of words. Nash pointed out landmarks, shared knowledge of the terrain, and once stopped to show her tracks left by a small herd of pronghorn antelope. It was the most talkative he had been since they met, and Josephine found herself drawn to this glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a low rise, and Nash reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Amarillo." Josephine felt a complex mix of emotions as she gazed at the town spread before them. Relief at having reached their destination safely, anticipation at meeting her aunt, and, unexpectedly, a tinge of regret that her journey with Nash was coming to an end. Amarillo was larger than she had expected, a proper town with several streets of buildings, not just the small collection of structures she had imagined. From their vantage point, they could see a church steeple, what appeared to be a substantial mercantile, and numerous other businesses and homes stretching toward a cluster of larger buildings that Nash identified as the Thornton Ranch headquarters at the town's edge. "Your aunt's place," he explained. "The Thorntons practically built Amarillo, own half the businesses and most of the good grazing land for 50 miles. As they drew closer to the town, Josephine became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. 2 days on the trail, compounded by their hasty escape from the way station, had left her travel dress stained and crumpled, her hair falling from its pins despite her best efforts to maintain some semblance of propriety. "I can't meet my aunt looking like this," she fretted, attempting to smooth her skirts and tuck stray wisps of hair back into place. Nash's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was coming to recognize. "I reckon your aunt will be more concerned with your safety than your appearance." "You don't understand," Josephine sighed. "I've never met her. Father said she was quite particular about such things." Nash considered this, then nodded toward a small building on the outskirts of town. "That's Jensen's livery. The owner's wife sometimes takes in washing. Might be able to freshen up there before heading to the Thornton place." Grateful for his understanding, Josephine agreed to the detour. As they approached the livery stable, A stout man with enormous mutton chop whiskers emerged to greet them. "Afternoon, folks," he called cheerfully. "Looking for stabling, and perhaps a place for the lady to freshen up before we continue to the Thornton Ranch," Nash added, dismounting smoothly. At the mention of the Thornton name, the liveryman's demeanor became even more accommodating. Of course. My wife would be happy to assist." "You folks friends of the Thorntons? Miss Walters here is Mrs. Thornton's niece," Nash explained. "Just arrived from back east." "Well now, ain't that something?" The man beamed, extending a hand to help Josephine down from her horse. "Olaf Jensen at your service, miss. We've heard Mrs. Thornton had family coming. Been quite the talk of the town, it has." While Olaf led their horses into the stable, promising the finest care, his wife Martha emerged from the adjoining house. She was a plump, pleasant-faced woman with kind eyes that widened at the sight of Josephine's travel-worn appearance. "You poor dear," she exclaimed. "Come inside this instant. We'll have you looking presentable in no time." Josephine shot a grateful look at Nash before allowing herself to be ushered into the Jensen home. Inside, Martha efficiently heated water for a basin, provided a clean towel and a brush for Josephine's hair, and even produced a relatively clean shawl to replace Josephine's mud-spattered one. "Mr. Jensen and I owe the Thorntons a great deal," Martha explained as she helped Josephine arrange her hair into a more acceptable style. "Mr. Thornton loaned us the money to start the livery when no bank would. Been loyal to the family ever since." As Martha chattered, sharing bits of local gossip and information about the Thorntons, Josephine found herself growing increasingly anxious. What if her aunt didn't welcome her? What if the falling out with her father had been so severe that Clara Thornton would refuse to acknowledge her niece? And beneath these immediate concerns lay a deeper question that Josephine wasn't quite ready to examine: what would happen to Nash once he had delivered her safely to her destination. When she emerged from the house some 30 minutes later, feeling considerably refreshed if not exactly presentable by Boston standards, she found Nash waiting patiently, his own appearance somewhat improved. He had evidently taken the opportunity to wash away the worst of the trail dust and had trimmed his stubble to a more manageable length. "Better?" he asked, his eyes taking in her transformation. "Somewhat," Josephine replied, suddenly shy under his appraising gaze. "Thank you for suggesting this stop." Nash nodded, then turned to thank the Jensens for their hospitality. Olaf waved away his attempt to pay for their services. "Any family of the Thorntons is welcome to whatever we can provide," he insisted. "Besides, Mrs. Thornton would have our hides if she heard we charged her niece." They departed on foot, leading their horses through the town proper. Josephine was conscious of curious glances from townsfolk as they passed, and she wondered how many had already heard of her impending arrival. Amarillo was clearly a place where news traveled fast. The Thornton Ranch House stood at the edge of town, a substantial 2-story structure of weathered wood and native stone, with a broad veranda wrapping around the front and side. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, with cowboys visible working with horses in the distance. A wrought iron gate bearing the Thornton brand marked the entrance to the property. As they approached, Josephine's steps slowed. "What if she doesn't want me here?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since they'd sighted the town. Nash stopped, turning to face her. "Then we'll figure something out," he said simply. "You won't be left with nowhere to go, Josephine. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice steadied her. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, let's meet my Aunt Clara." They continued up the path to the main house. Before they could reach the steps to the veranda, the front door opened and a woman emerged. She was tall and straight-backed, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Her black dress was simple but clearly of fine quality, and she carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Josephine Walters," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Josephine stepped forward. "Yes, madam, I'm Josephine." The woman descended the steps with surprising speed for someone who appeared to be in her 60s. She stopped a few feet from Josephine, studying her face intently before her stern expression softened. "You have your mother's eyes," she said, and to Josephine's astonishment, her voice trembled slightly. "I'm your Aunt Clara. Welcome to Thornton Ranch." Before Josephine could respond, Clara Thornton stepped forward and embraced her. The gesture was stiff, as if the woman was unaccustomed to such displays, but it was sincere. When she pulled back, Josephine was startled to see moisture in her aunt's eyes. "We received word from Wichita about your father," Clara said, regaining her composure. "I am truly sorry, Josephine. Whatever differences Edward and I had, he was still my brother." "Thank you," Josephine managed, touched by the unexpected warmth of her reception. Clara's attention shifted to Nash, who had remained a respectful distance behind Josephine. "And who might this be?" "Nash Irwin, madam," he introduced himself, removing his hat. "I encountered Miss Walters on the trail from Wichita and offered my protection for the remainder of her journey." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Nash Irwin, the bounty hunter?" "Yes, madam." To Josephine's surprise, Clara nodded approvingly. "Then I owe you my thanks, Mr. Irwin. These are dangerous times for a young woman to be traveling alone." "It was my honor to assist," Nash replied formally. Clara turned back to Josephine. "You must be exhausted, my dear. Come inside and rest. We'll have your things brought in, and you can tell me about your journey over dinner." As they followed Clara toward the house, Josephine glanced back at Nash, who had not moved from his position. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of journey's end, of parting to come. "Mr. Irwin," Clara called, noticing that he wasn't following. "You'll join us for dinner, of course. I insist." Nash hesitated before nodding. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton." "That's very kind." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly elegant, with polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and even a few paintings adorning the walls. It spoke of wealth carefully deployed rather than ostentatiously displayed. Clara showed Josephine to a comfortable guest room on the second floor, promising to send up hot water for a proper bath. Left alone, Josephine moved to the window, which offered a view of the ranch yard below. She could see Nash speaking with one of the ranch hands, likely arranging for the care of their horses. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither of them moved, and Josephine felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent ordeals. Then Nash nodded once and turned away, following the ranch hand toward the stables. The promised bath revived Josephine's spirits, washing away not just the physical grime of travel but some of the emotional weight of the past days. Clara had sent up a simple dress that had belonged to one of the ranch hand's wives, explaining that Josephine's trunks had arrived from Wichita the previous week, but would need to be unpacked. By the time she descended for dinner, feeling almost civilized again in clean clothes with her hair properly arranged, the sun had set, and lamps had been lit throughout the house. She found Clara in a comfortable sitting room, conversing with Nash. To Josephine's surprise, he had been provided with a clean shirt and had clearly made use of shaving supplies, his face now smooth and unexpectedly handsome without the trail dust and stubble. He rose when she entered, and something in his expression, a flash of admiration quickly concealed, sent warmth flooding through her. "Ah, there you are," Clara said, gesturing for Josephine to join them. "I've been hearing quite the tale from Mr. Irwin about your journey. It seems I owe him an even greater debt than I realized." During dinner, served in a formal dining room by a quietly efficient housekeeper, Nash related a somewhat edited version of their adventures, downplaying the danger they had faced but emphasizing Josephine's courage and resourcefulness. Clara listened with growing concern and evident pride in her niece's resilience. "It seems the Walters' backbone hasn't weakened in the younger generation," she observed, raising her glass in a small toast to Josephine. "Your father would be proud." "I'm not sure he would recognize me," Josephine admitted. "I scarcely recognize myself sometimes." "The West changes people," Clara said matter-of-factly, "usually for the better if they have the strength to adapt." Her sharp eyes moved between Josephine and Nash. "And sometimes it brings people together who might never have met in more civilized circumstances." There was a knowing quality to her comment that made Josephine blush slightly. Nash's expression remained neutral, though his eyes briefly met Josephine's across the table. After dinner, Clara excused herself to review some ranch business with her foreman, leaving Josephine and Nash alone in the parlor. For a moment, neither spoke, the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner marking the passage of time. "Your aunt seems like a remarkable woman," Nash finally said, breaking the silence. "She's not what I expected," Josephine admitted. "Father always described her as cold and unforgiving, but she's been nothing but kind." "People change," Nash observed. "Or perhaps your father only saw one side of her." They lapsed into silence again, both aware that the conversation was circling around what really needed to be said. "Will you be leaving in the morning?" Josephine asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Nash nodded slowly. "I should. I've stayed in one place too long already." "Because of Blackwood, the man you're hunting," partly, Nash acknowledged. "But also because it's time. You're safe now, you have a home, family. You don't need my protection anymore." Josephine looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "What if it's not about needing protection?" Nash's expression shifted, a complex mix of emotions crossing his features. "Josephine, I know it's foolish," she continued, her words coming faster now. "We've known each other only days. But in those days, I've experienced more of life, real life, than in all my years in Boston. And you were there for all of it, showing me how to survive, how to be strong. Those aren't reasons to feel attached," Nash said carefully. "Aren't they?" Josephine met his gaze directly. "Then tell me why you stayed with me. Why you risked your life for me, not once but multiple times. Was it truly just some code of honor? Or was it something more?" Nash rose from his chair, moving to stand by the window, his back to her. For a long moment he was silent, and Josephine feared she had overstepped, had imagined a connection that existed only in her mind. Then he spoke, his voice low but clear. "When I lost Sarah, I thought that part of me died with her. I've spent 8 years hunting men, bringing them to justice or to their graves. I told myself it was enough, that it was all I deserved after failing to protect her." He turned to face Josephine, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Then I saw you standing your ground against those outlaws, terrified but refusing to surrender, and something woke up inside me, something I thought was gone forever." Josephine stood, moving toward him, her heart pounding. "Nash." "I can't offer you anything, Josephine," he said, a note of desperation in his voice. "I'm a man with blood on his hands and a past that follows me wherever I go. You deserve better than that. You deserve a future without looking over your shoulder, without wondering if today is the day my enemies find me." "Shouldn't that be my choice to make?" she asked, stopping just short of reaching for him. "I've seen the darkness in this world now. I've felt it. I've even contributed to it." She swallowed hard, remembering the feel of her revolver firing Rakes's shocked expression. There's no going back to the innocent girl who left Boston. That person doesn't exist anymore. Nash's face softened, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and regret. You're an extraordinary woman, Josephine Walters. Any man would be proud to stand beside you. I don't want any man, she said simply. I want you. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nash reached out slowly, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied his strength. Josephine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the warmth of his skin against hers. I have to find him, Nash said softly. Blackwood. I can't rest until it's done. I understand, Josephine replied, meeting his gaze steadily. But when it's done, when you've found your justice. A small, genuine smile touched Nash's lips, the first full smile she had seen from him. When it's done, if you still feel this way, I'll come back. That's all I can promise. Then I'll be here, Josephine said, her own smile blossoming. Waiting. Nash's hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, before deepening into something more profound, a promise, a beginning rather than an ending. They broke apart at the sound of the parlor door opening. Clara Thornton stood in the doorway, one eyebrow raised but a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I see you two have reached an understanding, she observed dryly. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't step away from Nash. Aunt Clara. Clara waved away her explanation. No need to justify anything to me, my dear. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I recognized the way you looked at each other the moment you arrived. She fixed Nash with a penetrating stare. Though I do hope your intentions are honorable, Mr. Irwin. Nash met her gaze unflinchingly. They are, madam, but I have unfinished business that needs settling before I can offer Josephine the future she deserves. Clara nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Life rarely arranges itself according to our preferred timetables, Mr. Irwin. I suggest you settle your business as expeditiously as possible. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and you're welcome to stay at the ranch as long as necessary to prepare for your journey. We have excellent resources that might assist in your business. After she had gone, closing the door behind her, Josephine couldn't help a small laugh. I believe my aunt just offered to help you track down Blackwood. A remarkable woman indeed, Nash agreed, his arm still around Josephine's waist, and apparently not opposed to her niece forming an attachment to a bounty hunter. She seems to value directness and courage, Josephine observed. As do I. Nash's expression grew serious again. It could be months before I return, Josephine, maybe longer. I won't ask you to put your life on hold for me. You're not asking. I'm choosing. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I'll build a life here, help Aunt Clara with the ranch, learn about this new world I find myself in, and when you return, we'll see where we stand. Nash covered her hand with his own. When I return, he repeated, making it sound like a vow. The following morning dawned clear and bright. The storm of 2 days passed, leaving no trace except for puddles rapidly drying in the warm Texas sun. Josephine rose early, knowing Nash intended to depart after breakfast. She found him already in the stables, checking his gear and his horse with methodical care. I thought I might have to search for you, she said, approaching quietly. Nash looked up, a smile touching his eyes if not quite reaching his lips. I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. I know. Josephine moved closer, breathing in the familiar sense of hay and horses that had become strangely comforting over their journey together. Aunt Clara says her foreman has information about Blackwood's gang. Their last known location was near Santa Fe. Nash nodded. That matches what I'd heard. It's a place to start, at least. An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to navigate this parting after the revelations of the previous evening. I have something for you, Josephine said finally, pulling a small object from her pocket. It's not much, but... She held out her father's pocket watch, its silver case gleaming in the morning light. Father always said a man needs to know the time, and I want you to have something to remind you to come back. Nash accepted the watch with evident surprise, turning it over in his hands. Josephine, I can't take this. It was your father's. And now it's yours, she insisted. Please, I want you to have it. After a moment's hesitation, Nash slipped the watch into his vest pocket. Thank you. I'll keep it safe until I return. See that you do, Josephine replied, trying for a lightness she didn't entirely feel. Both the watch and yourself. Nash's expression softened as he reached for her, drawing her into his arms. I meant what I said last night. I will come back. I know, Josephine whispered against his chest. I believe you. When they kissed this time, there was an urgency to it, a need to memorize the feeling of being in each other's arms. Josephine poured everything she couldn't say into that kiss, her fear for his safety, her hope for his return, and the unexpected love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. They parted reluctantly at the sound of approaching footsteps. Clara Thornton appeared in the stable doorway, accompanied by her foreman, a weather-beaten man named Jackson. Mr. Irwin, Clara called. Jackson has prepared some information that might help in your search. Maps, names of contacts, places to avoid. Nash thanked them both, accepting the packet of documents Jackson offered. After a brief discussion of routes and potential dangers, it was time for him to leave. No reason remained to delay the inevitable parting. At the ranch gate, with his horse saddled and provisions secured, Nash said his formal goodbyes to Clara, thanking her for her hospitality and assistance. Then he turned to Josephine. This isn't really goodbye, he said quietly. Just until we meet again. Josephine nodded, determined not to cry. Until then, Nash Irwin. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. With a final nod to both women, he turned his mount toward the western horizon and rode away, his figure gradually diminishing with distance until he was just a speck on the vast Texas landscape. Only then did Josephine allow a single tear to trace its way down her cheek. He'll be back, Clara said confidently, placing a supportive hand on Josephine's shoulder. Men like that keep their promises. I hope you're right, Josephine replied, her eyes still fixed on the now empty horizon. I usually am, Clara said with a hint of humor. Now come along. If you're going to be waiting for a man to return from a dangerous mission, you might as well make yourself useful in the meantime. The ranch accounts need reviewing, and I want to show you the mercantile operations in town. Josephine allowed herself to be led back toward the house, grateful for her aunt's practical approach to what might otherwise have been a moment of overwhelming emotion. She had a feeling she and Clara Thornton were going to get along just fine. The days following Nash's departure fell into a rhythm, as Josephine adjusted to life at Thornton Ranch. Clara proved to be a demanding but fair mentor, determined that her niece should understand every aspect of the family businesses. They spent mornings reviewing ledgers and correspondence, afternoons often visiting the various Thornton enterprises in Amarillo, and evenings in surprisingly companionable conversation. Josephine learned that Clara had married Howard Thornton, a man 20 years her senior, after a whirlwind courtship that had scandalized her Boston family. Her brother Josephine's father had been particularly vocal in his disapproval, creating the rift that had never fully healed. Howard was already a wealthy man when we met, Clara explained one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Your father assumed I married him for his money. He couldn't understand that I loved Howard for his vision, his determination to build something lasting in this untamed place. And did you? Josephine asked. Build something lasting, Clara smiled, a genuine expression that softened her usually stern features. We did. 15 years together before his heart gave out. No children of our own, but we created this. She gestured toward the town and the ranch lands beyond. And now I have you to carry it forward. The responsibility inherent in that statement might once have terrified Josephine. But after everything she had endured on her journey to Amarillo, the challenge of helping manage the Thornton empire seemed almost manageable by comparison. Weeks passed, turning into months. Summer's heat gave way to the milder temperatures of autumn. Josephine found herself increasingly involved in the day-to-day operations of the ranch and its associated businesses. She discovered an aptitude for numbers that made her particularly valuable in reviewing contracts and accounts. Clara, initially skeptical of her city-bred niece's abilities, became increasingly reliant on Josephine's sharp mind and fresh perspective. The townsfolk of Amarillo, after initial curiosity about Mrs. Thornton's eastern niece, gradually accepted Josephine as part of the community. She made a few friends, particularly among the young wives of local businessmen and ranch hands. If some wondered about the mysterious man who had delivered her safely to town only to ride away again, Josephine kept those details private, sharing them only with Clara. Letters arrived occasionally from Nash Brief, practical communications that nonetheless revealed between the lines how often he thought of her. He was tracking Blackwood's gang through New Mexico, following leads that sometimes grew hot before cooling again. He never made specific promises about when he might return, but each letter ended with a variation of the same sentiment. Keep watching the horizon. One day you'll see me riding back to you. Josephine kept his letters tied with a ribbon in a drawer beside her bed, reading them often enough that the paper grew soft along the creases. She wrote to him as well, sending her replies to the various post offices he mentioned in his letters, never knowing if he would receive them before moving on but writing nonetheless. She told him about her life at the ranch, about Clara's lessons in business and frontier survival, about the changing seasons and the small dramas of Amarillo society. What she didn't write was how much she missed him, how often she found herself looking westward, hoping to see a lone rider approaching. Those feelings seemed too precious, too vulnerable to entrust to paper and the uncertainties of frontier postal service. As winter approached, bringing colder temperatures and occasional dustings of snow, activity at the ranch shifted focus. Cattle were moved to more sheltered pastures. Provisions were stockpiled against the possibility of storms that might isolate the ranch for days or weeks, and preparations were made for the quieter season ahead. It was during this time, with the first real winter storm brewing on the horizon, that Josephine received a telegram that sent her heart racing. Blackwood located stop confrontation imminent stop if successful will return within month stop keep faith stop. Nash Clara found her on the veranda, staring at the telegram with a mixture of hope and terror. Without a word, her aunt sat beside her, placing a supportive hand on her arm. He's found him, Josephine said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man he's been hunting all these years. Clara nodded, her expression grave. And now comes the most dangerous part of his journey. What if? Josephine couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. What if he doesn't return? Clara completed it for her. Then you will grieve and eventually you will move forward because that is what we do. but Nash Irwin struck me as a man who doesn't make promises lightly. If he said he will return, then I believe he will. Josephine wanted desperately to share her aunt's confidence. But as the winter storm moved in, bringing howling winds and bitter cold, she found herself plagued by fears and doubts. Each day that passed without word from Nash seemed to stretch her hope a little thinner, like a rope pulled taut to the point of breaking. The storm lasted 3 days, burying Amarillo under a blanket of snow unusual for the Texas Panhandle. When it finally cleared, leaving a crisp, bright world of white behind, the town slowly emerged from hibernation. Roads were cleared, businesses reopened, and life resumed its normal pace. Josephine threw herself into work with renewed vigor, as if keeping busy could somehow protect her from the anxiety of waiting. She rode out with the ranch hands to check on cattle, spent hours updating ledgers, and even helped Clara organize a modest Christmas celebration for the ranch employees and their families. As December progressed, bringing the holiday season into full swing, Josephine found moments of genuine joy amidst her concern for Nash. The simple pleasure of decorating the ranch house with evergreen boughs, the satisfaction of selecting thoughtful gifts for Clara and the staff, the comfort of traditions maintained even in this frontier setting all served to remind her that life continued, with or without certainty about the future. On Christmas Eve, with a light snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Josephine and Clara sat in the parlor, enjoying a quiet moment after the festivities of the ranch Christmas dinner. The housekeeper had outdone herself with a feast that had left everyone comfortably replete, and now the house was peaceful, the only sounds the occasional pop of the fire and the distant laughter of ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse. "I have something for you," Clara said, reaching into her desk drawer. "I was going to wait until tomorrow, but I think perhaps tonight is better." She handed Josephine a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Curious, Josephine unwrapped it to find a small leather-bound book inside. Opening it, she discovered it was a journal, its pages filled with Clara's neat, precise handwriting. "My journal from my first year in Amarillo," Clara explained. "When I was newly married and struggling to adapt to life here, I thought you might find some resonance in my experiences." Touched by the personal nature of the gift, Josephine carefully turned the pages, glimpsing entries that spoke of homesickness, of challenges overcome, of a love that had sustained Clara through the difficulties of frontier life. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "This means a great deal to me." Clara nodded, a rare softness in her expression. "I see much of myself in you, Josephine. The determination, the willingness to adapt, the courage to love despite uncertainty. Howard and I had our share of separations in the early years. The waiting never gets easier, but you grow stronger through it." Josephine was about to respond when the distant sound of hoofbeats caught her attention. She froze, listening intently as the sound grew closer. "Probably one of the hands returning late from town," Clara said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of her own explanation. Josephine rose and moved to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtain to peer into the snowy night. A single rider was approaching the ranch house, his figure indistinct in the swirling snow illuminated by the porch lanterns. "Clara," she breathed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it must be audible. I think it's him." She didn't wait for her aunt's response. In a moment of uncharacteristic impulsiveness, Josephine grabbed her shawl and rushed from the parlor, through the entrance hall, and out onto the veranda. The cold air hit her like a physical blow, but she barely noticed as she strained to see the approaching rider more clearly. As he drew nearer, Details emerged from the snowy darkness, the familiar outline of broad shoulders, the distinctive way he sat a horse, the glint of moonlight on dark hair not quite hidden by his hat. Then he looked up, and even at a distance, Josephine recognized those ice-blue eyes. Nash. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, dropping the reins as he strode toward the house. Josephine couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as he climbed the steps to the veranda and stood before her. His face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes alight with something that made her heart soar. "You kept your promise," she finally managed, her voice barely audible over the soft hiss of falling snow. "I told you I would," Nash replied simply. Then, as if he could no longer bear the distance between them, he closed the remaining space in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was both homecoming and new beginning, a reaffirmation of what had begun months ago, and a promise of what might still be. Josephine melted into his embrace, the cold forgotten, the long months of waiting dissolving in the warmth of his return. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Josephine became aware of Clara standing in the doorway behind them, a knowing smile on her face. "Mr. Irwin," she called, "you have impeccable timing. Christmas Eve is the perfect occasion for returns and reunions." She gestured toward the open door. "Come inside before you both freeze. There's hot coffee and plenty of Christmas dinner left if you're hungry." Nash kept one arm around Josephine's waist as they followed Clara into the warmth of the house. In the light of the entrance hall, Josephine could see him more clearly, the new lines at the corners of his eyes, a small scar near his temple that hadn't been there before, the weariness beneath his obvious joy at seeing her again. "Is it done?" she asked quietly as Clara busied herself instructing the housekeeper to prepare food and coffee. "Did you find him?" Nash nodded, his expression solemn. "Blackwood won't hurt anyone else. Ever." The simplicity of his statement told Josephine everything she needed to know. She squeezed his hand in understanding, asking no further questions about what must have been a brutal confrontation. "And now?" she asked instead, the question encompassing far more than just his immediate plans. Nash's smile returned, warming his eyes in a way that made her breath catch. "Now I keep the other promise I made, if you'll still have me." "If," Josephine repeated, arching an eyebrow. "I believe the condition was whether I still felt the same way, and I do, Nash Irwin, more than ever." The look that passed between them contained volumes, shared experiences, separate journeys, and the promise of a future together. Later, after Nash had eaten and shared a sanitized version of his travels with Clara, the 3 of them sat in the parlor, the Christmas Eve fire burning low. Clara, claiming fatigue, retired early, leaving Nash and Josephine alone with the quiet crackle of flames and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. "I got all your letters," Nash said, reaching into his coat to produce a bundle of well-traveled papers. "Carried them with me everywhere. Read them so often I practically know them by heart." Josephine smiled, touched by the thought of him treasuring her words during his dangerous quest. "And I kept yours just as carefully." "I'm not the same man who rode away 6 months ago," Nash said after a moment, his tone serious. "Hunting Blackwood, finishing what I started 8 years ago. It changed me, closed a chapter I needed to end." "And opened a new one, I hope," Josephine said softly. Nash nodded, taking her hand in his. "If you'll write it with me." From his pocket, he produced a small box, its surface worn from travel but its purpose unmistakable. Josephine's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "I'm not a wealthy man," Nash said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I can't promise a life free from hardship or danger, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for as long as I draw breath. Josephine Walters, will you marry me?" "Yes," Josephine answered without hesitation, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Yes, Nash, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Josephine felt as though her journey had finally come full circle. From the terrified young woman facing outlaws alone in the vastness of the Texas Panhandle to this moment of perfect clarity and certainty, it had been a transformation as profound as it was unexpected. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the small Amarillo church with Clara standing witness and most of the town in attendance. The bride wore a simple white dress ordered from Dallas, and the groom wore a new black suit that couldn't quite disguise the dangerous man beneath its civilized exterior. No one who saw them exchange vows could doubt the depth of feeling between them, a love forged in adversity and tempered by separation. At the reception held at Thornton Ranch, Clara made a surprising announcement. She was signing over a parcel of ranch land to the newlyweds, along with a half-interest in the Amarillo Mercantile. "It's time I had a proper partner in the Thornton enterprises," she explained when Josephine protested the generosity of the gift. "And while I'm not quite ready to retire, I find I enjoy the thought of having family to carry on what Howard and I built." The gift provided Nash and Josephine with the foundation for their future. While Nash admitted he wasn't suited to full-time ranching or shopkeeping, he found satisfaction in helping manage the security aspects of the Thornton holdings. His reputation alone deterred potential troublemakers, and his connections throughout the territories proved valuable as the businesses expanded. Occasionally, when particularly dangerous criminals threatened the region, Nash would still ride out in his capacity as a bounty hunter. But these absences were brief and infrequent, nothing like the months-long separation they had endured before. And Josephine found that having experienced the worst of uncertainty, she could bear these shorter partings with grace, secure in the knowledge of his return. Their first child, a son they named Edward Howard Irwin after both their fathers, was born in the autumn of 1877. Nash, who had claimed to know nothing about babies, proved to be a natural father, his protective instincts channeled into fierce devotion to his son. Watching him cradle their newborn with hands that had once dealt death so efficiently, Josephine fell in love with her husband all over again. In the spring of 1879, they welcomed twin daughters, Sarah Clara and Marie Josephine, completing their family and firmly cementing the merger of the Irwin and Thornton legacies. Clara, who had initially maintained a certain formality even with her grandnephew, completely abandoned her reserve with the arrival of the girls, proving to be an indulgent and adoring great-aunt. Life in Amarillo continued to evolve as the town grew with the expanding railroad and cattle industries. The Thornton-Irwin enterprises flourished under the combined leadership of Clara, Josephine, and Nash, each bringing different strengths to the partnership. By the time the children were old enough for school, the family had built a new home on their ranch land larger than their first cabin but still modest by Thornton standards, exactly as Josephine preferred. On rare occasions, Nash would still wake in the night, haunted by memories of his past. In those moments, Josephine would hold him close, offering the quiet comfort of her presence until the ghosts receded. Similarly, she sometimes found herself startled by sudden movements or loud sounds, echoes of that terrifying journey that had brought them together. Nash understood these moments without explanation, his steadfast support helping her through the brief returns of old fears. 10 years to the day after Nash had ridden into her life, declaring her under his watch as 4 outlaws surrounded her wagon. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the golden light of a Texas sunset. Nash's arm rested comfortably around Josephine's waist, his other hand absently turning her father's pocket watch, which he still carried everywhere. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Josephine asked, leaning into his familiar strength. "If you had chosen another trail or decided not to intervene?" Nash was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said finally. "I wasn't looking for you, wasn't looking for any of this." He gestured toward their home, their children, the life they had built together. "But somehow it found me anyway." "Found us," Josephine corrected gently. "Remember what you told me once, about this country testing people, stripping away pretenses until only what's real remains." Nash nodded, a smile touching his lips at the memory. "I remember. This is what's real," Josephine said simply, turning in his arms to face him. "This life, our family, the love between us. Everything else was just the journey that brought us here." As Nash lowered his head to kiss her, the setting sun cast their entwined shadows across the porch, one shape instead of two, inseparable in the gathering twilight. From adversity had come strength, from danger had come safety, and from the most unlikely of beginnings had come a love story written across the wild frontier of their shared destiny.